to forego any kind of financial reward or payment or wage or whatever till about I was probably 7 to 8 years into the business.
Holy cow.
And I need to make the margins that will allow me to be still incentivized to continue producing and supporting the customers. And they need me to make money. I mean, otherwise I won't be in business and I won't be able to serve them.
Welcome to Manufacturing Insiders. Today I have Jeff Barth with me. He is really an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, this guy is a go-getter. One thing I really loved about our initial conversation was just Jeff's passion in looking at new things and trying to really improve things and make things better. A lot of times I think manufacturers kind of fall into this mindset of this is the way that we've always done it. This is the way that we're always going to do it. And that just really is not going to work for the future of U.S. manufacturing. But Jeff built a successful business, and welcome to Manufacturing Insiders. Glad to have you on today.
Well, thanks a lot, Nate. It's a pleasure to be on here, and I'm looking forward to having our conversation.
Awesome. So you just give us a little bit of a understanding of what you guys do over at JWB. My understanding is you're really in the electronics kind of wire processing industry, right?
Yeah, so basically we're a machine shop, and we can do, mill work, some lathe work, and a lot of grinding, surface grinding. But we focus primarily on the customers that need to do wire processing, cable assembly. Basically, the core product that we do is we make and distribute wire cutting and stripping blades. And so we are an aftermarket manufacturer in that segment. And if you kind of want to have a visual of what that is, and it would be when iPod cords were actual cords, right? And they had the jack and the connector on the end. You can kind of think of a big spool of wire. It comes through an automatic wire processing machine. And the ends get cut in strips. You can put the jack and the connectors on the end.
Yep.
Well, I make replacement blades that go in the machines that cut and strip wire. So that's primarily what we do. And the more I've narrowed my focus on doing that, the more my company has grown and more customers that I've been able to serve. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, it's something I preach all the time is if you're a machine shop, you're a fabricator, you're an injection molder, you have this huge competitive advantage to develop and make your own product. And so you guys kind of did that out the gate, and I think that's really smart. Now, actually, this might be time for you to think about the reverse and start to look at some of the contract stuff as kind of a supplement to that business.
Yeah, I think I'm focused on continuing to grow my business to a certain level so that I can have all the cash that I need. Probably not all the cash, but the cash I need to be able to grow into other type of machining. So the Phoenix metropolitan market, there's a lot of new defense contractors, a lot of EV supply chain that's being built out, the chips area. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. The supply chains for those haven't even been put together. So I think there's a lot of big opportunity in that realm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. And I work with some different companies in that market, and it seems like it's growing very quickly. And I completely agree that that's a great place in the country to be. And a lot of manufacturers want to keep these supply chains kind of close to home. And so, people in Pennsylvania are going to get a lot of business in Pennsylvania, while they could get it outside the area in some cases, but same goes for Arizona. So you kind of started off your career in the financial services industry, and at some point you just decided, hey, I want to buy a manufacturing company.
I spent 10 years each at two different like Fortune 100 companies. And I enjoyed that. I got to play as an entrepreneur in the side of a large company. but it didn't contain my money that I had to use. And I got tired of pushing paper. I wanted to actually create and make something physical. I felt nearshoring or reshoring was going to start coming back, and it did. It took longer than I thought, but that I wanted to get into something that I could actually make and distribute a product, and that proved to be challenging because when I started doing it was like 2008, 2009, when all the financial markets started going down, and it took a lot of perseverance for a number of years to actually start getting some really good traction.
Yeah. So, I understand the drive, to want to kind of work with your hands a little bit more and to physically make a product as opposed to, trading this fictional fiat currency that we've created. But why did you choose this company?
To be honest, to me at the time, it didn't matter what type of manufacturing. So I looked at like 45 companies, from injection molding to fabrication, to prototype parts. And, I had a price range that I needed to be within for the assets. And so this one just happened to be that. And I would call this the assets to this. The previous owner really wasn't involved in the business and had stepped away a lot. And so the sales had fallen, but it had good bones to that. And so I wanted to take that and figure out, can I grow this? At the time, not realizing the market was going to be going into the tank. And so when I picked this one, it's like, I can do this. I can figure it out. I had a little bit of help because I didn't have any real manufacturing or machining experience at all. So some people start with they're a machinist and they say, I can go on my own, right? Well, I was looking at this. I want to be a business owner, entrepreneur, and I can figure this out from a manufacturing standpoint. And the help I had was my dad had spent like at the time, about 50 years in machining. He was 70 and he came out of retirement to come work for me in Arizona. So he moved from Minnesota, and that helped me out. Because I didn't know the difference between different types of tool steel or plastic materials or stainless or aluminum, and then how to actually run the machines. Right. Since I have. And that's probably why it took a while to really get the momentum going, because there was a lot of learning curve that I had to go through.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a huge undertaking. I can't even imagine. So would you say that was kind of your biggest struggle or sticking point in the early years of the business, was kind of learning the background of the machining trade? Or were there other kind of surprising aspects of, taking over a business like that you had to deal with?
That was, my naivete is probably both a hindrance and a godsend, both at the same time, because I felt like I can do this. I just keep pushing and I'll grow that. But each of the different stages as I was moving along, I ran up against things I just didn't know. And so it took me longer to research to understand, and this market that I'm in, because at first I said I can do any product, right? And so I joined the machining group and I can make this kind of part and that kind of part. And one, I didn't have the equipment to do that, or the insight or the knowledge. We could do a lot of things, but it was manual. And so doing that manually, you just can't be price competitive. And plus some things you can't do. So, so that's kind of, I would say it just took a long time for me to make progress in that. Plus it's such a niche. So you can't just, walk into a place and say, hey, can I make parts for you? Especially in this niche, it's like, you got to figure out who has them. the need to have the blades, and it's you can't just go Google search who needs wire cutting and stripping blades.
Right.
So it's one customer at a time. And I guess to sum up that in my approach to it is that I look at this as a 30 to 50 year program for me. When I started, I have to have the relationships, and they're going to take time, and I have to have patience with that, and I just have to keep getting back up again.
Right. Yeah, I definitely can see how the learning process would be huge, but then you also have to kind of understand the customer base. You have to understand how you're going to get in front of them. And I'm the kind of, that's kind of what I do every day, right? Like, people come to me with their product or service, and I say, okay, here's how we're going to find your customers. Here's what they're looking for. Unfortunately, I've been doing this long enough that it's fairly easy for me to wrap my head around, like, okay, so you sell wire stripping blades. Who buys those machines? Okay, wire processing guys, large electronics manufacturers, cable harness manufacturers. Okay, now we have a target. Okay, let's look at some associations. Let's start to generate content around what they're looking for. Without that knowledge, what did you do?
Well, when I started, it was a time when the internet was just starting to happen, really, and people had static websites. And almost all my business was within the U.S. And so again, this could be me being naive. I decided, okay, I want to figure out, can I sell around the world? It's just as hard to find it in the U.S. as it find customers within the U.S. or, going abroad. And so I worked hard at trying to get my website that was more dynamic. Fairly early on, like 2012 or 13, I created my first version of an online store. And, people weren't, for B2B, really engaged yet for buying online.
Right.
But over time, it's starting to really take hold. And so I've been fortunate to be able to serve customers in over 13 countries just through my e-commerce platform.
Wow.
And
that's really cool.
And then also introducing Amazon to my mix of online sales. Going and doing some of the trade shows for sure helped doing that. But making my website more dynamic. YouTube was a big part of it, because right away I started doing YouTube. When I go back and look at some of the YouTube videos, I kind of cringe. It was me holding up a GoPro and going, all right, this is Jeff Barth. Welcome to my shop in Tempe, Arizona. And I talk through the parts that we make to try to create credibility. And the goal was to have it on the YouTube channel. But what I didn't realize is that also helps the Google algorithm. And that's really helpful for increasing the ranking for my site, for my e-commerce, and for the Google YouTubes or the YouTubes. So it's been a whole bunch of things where I probably put sometimes more money into it than I needed to if I had some professional help while I was doing it. But I certainly learned an awful lot.
Sure.
And it got me comfortable being uncomfortable and getting on the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I really do like that perspective. I think it's very difficult, like I said, for a lot of manufacturers to try new things. And, you are kind of throwing a lot of things out there and seeing what sticks, and obviously having some success with it. But yeah, certainly one of the benefits, and I'm not necessarily trying to sell myself here, but one of the benefits to working with somebody that markets a lot of different types of manufacturers is I've gone through a ton of iterations of what's working, what's not working. I do it for my own business. And so, when you're running a machine shop, for you to be able to allocate the amount of time that you need to these things and make sure that you're not wasting your time on certain things, I think is huge. But really, the name of the game, like you've kind of observed, is content generation, whether it's video content, written content, The more stuff you can put out there, the more, the wider net you're creating to draw in that target market. And so that is definitely a smart approach. So when you're kind of going through this process in the early years of building your business, how do you feel that your financial background kind of assisted you? I would assume that you have some skill sets that you bring to the table in that area that probably a lot of shop owners don't have.
So I probably brought a couple perspectives that were really helpful. I had a lot of responsibility. So my teams were like 300 to 500 people in the last last few roles that I had. And you learn because you have to be responsible for the spend there. But the challenge with that in relating it to a small business that I have is that it wasn't really my money, right? It was someone else's, and all I'd have to do is make sure I got approval,
Right.
or have a budget for that expenditures. But I had a lot of experience with the P&L and understanding those different categories and understanding the categories that if I want to actually grow this business, I'm going to have to allocate funds to. One of the things that I did early on is that I until like 2015 or 16, I didn't pay myself a penny. So, and that was a challenge. So I relied on some of the assets that I had accumulated before to be able to make sure I can, make it as a family. My wife and I had agreed right away that, okay, we're going to do this business. We can't use our retirement money. None of the retirement money are our house ever.
Right.
So we had some rules there, and there were some safeguards there because we had a reasonable amount in those in there, so that if that part of it is I had a backdrop that if the business didn't work out,
right,
we aren't going to be in financial ruin. It will be an emotional hit. It will suck, if you will. You'll go through all those different pains. But there was a little bit of a backstop. And so that allowed me to be a little more creative, probably. It's allowed me to test all sorts of things, whether it's, I guess that's what I probably did, is just a lot of testing on social. That's because to me, that was the only way I was going to get known.
Mm-hmm. So, with kind of a background in finance, did you go out and look for, people in that arena I generally would think of as, they're always looking for a way to leverage other people's money to build what they're trying to build. Is that something that you did?
I've had at different times to do financing. The financing was always debt financing, usually through an institution. There were some times where, now pretty much it's through a traditional bank. But at the time there was like, I don't know if you call it hard money, where they'll pull money out every week. And I needed that to cash flow. As a small business, usually don't have the options of a larger business. I always tried to create relationships when I didn't need the money, so that when I did, I had access to it. And so that was part of, unfortunately, you spend time doing that instead of, machining or, getting new customers, just because you want to have that backstop in case, the market dips real quickly.
Right.
And most machine shops or manufacturers, they're a month or two away from significant financial challenge. So that was a component. I always watched my spend too. So I would be looking at my financials and my bank accounts to make sure that, okay, I'm going to be able to flow and I'm able to maintain, I don't know if I've ever been 30 days late on anything ever.
Yeah.
And so that was a thing I kind of pride myself on, but it was difficult sometimes, making sure you can make payroll every single time.
Oh, I know.
So, and, and, and you have to, otherwise you lose trust
Right.
with your employees, you lose trust with, your suppliers, and you have to maybe, I guess, figure that out. And so I decided to forego any kind of financial reward or payment or wage or whatever till about I was probably 7 8 years into the business.
Holy cow. That's commitment. I can I can see 2 or 3 years, but yeah, that's quite an investment. What
Well,
gave you that level of faith? I mean, I would think a lot of people would have said to themselves, I don't think was the best decision. I'm going to go look for something else.
so that for sure entered into my head and my wife's head. Are you going to be able to make this work? And I would say some of the things that I would equate to reasons why I've been able to continue moving forward is that I have kind of an internal full cup of optimism. I think it's balanced with realism also. And every time you kind of get knocked down, which I think all business owners and leaders of companies, they get knocked down, but you got to get back up again. And there's for sure times when I thought, what the heck am I doing? If I just go back into the corporate world, I'm going to be fine. And as you get older, you kind of go like, well, how is this going to affect my financial future as I just turned 60 this year, and what effect does that have on it if I'm not actually be able to, I guess, financially make it and get some of the spoils, because I was doing pretty well in the corporate world. And my guess is that I could go back in, obviously the times change, the technologies change, but rise to that level again.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I want to do this, and so, I get one of the key things, I would say that it's imperative is that you pick the right partner, meaning the person you spend your life with. So my wife and I have been married now just over 35 years, and it has not always been easy, but we both had faith in each other that we're going to be able to make it through. So I think that's a key component. And if you don't have that, it's really hard because, no matter how much optimism I have, there are times when, I kind of go dark in my head about, is this really going to do it? Can I really make this happen? What do I know about running this business? And am I fooling myself? And to have that right partner that's going to be able to be there for you, say, you've got this, you've continued to make progress. I believe in you.
Yeah.
You're bringing me back into some of the, and I don't want to say dark times, but times with the kind of redefined. And then one of the things I did that started to really work is I narrowed the focus of my business, and I went and say, okay, I'm only going to do millwork and or grinding, and then I narrowed it even further to just blades, standard and custom blades, and some connectors.
Mm-hmm.
And that freed up a whole bunch of headspace because I wasn't trying to figure out how I can be everything to everyone.
Right. No, I think that's good advice. I like that.
So
that was kind of one of your strategies for dealing with some of those dark times, was basically realizing that you were too scattered. You were just, and like I said in the early stage of the podcast here, you're an entrepreneurial person. I can sense that about you. And I think the fatal flaw of us entrepreneurial types is, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. Oh, we should do that. Like, this is a great idea. And then you eventually don't have time to really focus on one thing. And I think that's a really important thing for a lot of people to realize. and I always observe this, like you got idea people, I'm sure you know them, like, oh yeah, I'm going to create this new product that whatever. And you're like, yeah, that's going to last 3 weeks and you're going to be on to the next thing. And it's like being able to be the person that's not only an idea person, but also the person that delivers is, those are two completely different things that you need to figure out how to bring together.
I would add to it and say I'm self-diagnosed with squirrel syndrome. Like, oh, here's nuts over here and there's nuts over there, and I can keep doing that all day long, but I have to bring it back to some of the core components, and that might be part of the traits of an entrepreneur too.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent 15 years kind of going through that iteration of idea, excitement, burnout, right? And I've gotten to the point where I will not allocate energy to something that I do not think is going to work. And so I'm pretty good at kind of assessing whether something's going to work through, just some basic criteria, and then deciding whether it's worth going after. And if it is, we are going to throw our weight behind it. But if it's not, we're just going to shut it down. So the blades are working great. What's your next step? How are you going to get to a $5 million business in the next 3 years?
Well, I would say part of it is still the blades, staying focused on that. The things that I'm doing and developing internationally is really helping me start to see the pathway to that. I sell in 17 countries, and I'm, even though, so exporting is about 65% of my business. Only 35% just stays within the U.S. And I'm only beginning to scratch the surface of the opportunities for that. So there's a certain number of focus for that, to stay in there developing and maybe adding some distribution overseas. So that's a component. The next part is as the cash flow continues to increase, then I'm going to start networking within the Phoenix metropolitan area, and seeing what's needed, how I can fulfill a need, and then identify what kind of equipment do I need to purchase. And I think I'm looking into doing more of that, boots on the ground in the Phoenix metropolitan area, probably in the next 6 to 12 months.
Contract manufacturing,
yeah,
machining.
Yep. So, yep. And I also need to make sure that my target margins are going to be 20 to 30%. And so how do I do that?
Where did you come up with that? Where did you come up with that number?
Well, my margins, as I start to have a little more scale in my business, is pretty good, higher than that. And so when I look at, this is going on my gut understanding, I guess, so I don't have all the data to back it up, that, successful manufacturers are 8 to 20% net profit margin.
Sure.
And for me to expend the risk of all the equipment purchase, I want to make sure that I can be in that higher range to make it worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? Because in production machining, you're probably going to be on the lower end of that 8 to 20%.
Right. So that's a great question. And how I'm trying to look and understand is there things that I can do specifically for the electronic assembly, or the PCB board, or somehow related into the supply chain of either chip manufacturing or basically the electronics assembly, not the cable assembly. And as more of it comes back, there's not going to be, this is my perspective, there's not going to be as many suppliers in that niche. And if I'm local and I can serve that market well, I might be able to have a little better margin in there and charge more.
Sure.
I like to think people, once they get to know me, they want to work with me. And it's hard then to create a supply chain for those companies. And so that's a niche, an additional niche market. So it's not just anybody doing any type of machining. It's probably going to be focused towards that segment. It's a sister industry of the cable assembly wire processing industry. So there are some connection points. So that's my goal. So whether or not I'm able to obtain the 20 to 30% net margins, we'll have to see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You might end up in some more lower volume prototyping type niche there. Now it's an interesting problem to solve, and I actually think it's intelligent that you're starting there instead of just saying, hey, I want to go after production machining. You're starting with the margin that you want to achieve and what space is going to be the best one to get you there.
Right.
Yeah, I think we could come up with some answers for that. But right. Yeah, that's very interesting.
So, as I go through, it's like I'm not, some business owners like, oh, I can't charge too much because then I won't get the job.
Right.
Or they'll go somewhere else or whatever, what's mentally in someone's head. And I decided that my frame is evolved because I was for sure there. I got to get anything that will bring some revenue in, right? I've decided that I'm not going to be the lowest price provider. Mm-hmm. Unless I can be really profitable with huge volume, being the low price provider, it's not going to serve me well to be the second lowest price provider. And so I'm looking at it as that I want to push towards the higher end of that, provide good value, the relationships, to serve them. Maybe it's quick turn is some of the things that they're willing to pay for. Mm-hmm. But I need to make money, and I need to make the margins that will allow me to be still incentivized to continue producing and supporting the customers. And they need me to make money. I mean, otherwise I won't be in business and I won't be able to serve them.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a mindset shift. So if I'm charging a little bit more, maybe I don't get all the business, but I don't have to do as many then. Right. And the margins can be there. And so I would be first to say I don't have it figured out. But I know that that's my role. And then I'm trying to think of other ways that I can, how do I get in front of more people with low cost so that, I can continue to have a pipeline of businesses. So a lot of machine shops, they have 4 to 6, 8 customers. Mine, I have on a 3-year cycle of buying, probably closer to 500. So I'm used to that kind of model where I don't think I have anybody that's concentrated more than 5% of my business. And so if I lose a few because I'm not able, because it just isn't profitable, it's okay. I mean, I still want to grow and I want to get as much business as I can, but I need it to be the right business.
Right.
One of the things that I've started doing is getting involved with the trade group. So the trade group is IPC. They're an international thing for predominantly electronics and electronic assembly. They've recently, in the last 3 years, have been more involved with the smaller side of it, which would be the wire harness cable assembly side. And I like one of the management events, I sponsor an event, and the positive there is it really doesn't cost me anything net wise to do it, but I get exposure and introductions to a lot of different people that are
Right.
business owners. And so that's I'm trying to think strategically, and how do I do that? So my brand and my name is right next to the big original equipment manufacturers' names and some of the bigger players in the industry. And
Yep.
it's it's just a good, for me, a good trade.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, it is important to consider kind of the other trade that you're making, like on the continuum of investment versus effort, where the less you invest, the more effort you have to put into that, say, business development effort, right? And that's one thing, that's one mistake I see a lot of owners make, is they say, well, I'm just going to, have my sales team go to these trade shows and set up and do all of this stuff that works, right? But it's a lot of effort, right?
Right.
Cold calling is a lot of effort. I'm let's hit the easy button, guys, right? Let's figure out what your customers are looking for. Let's generate the content that's going to draw them in, and let's just sit back and relax and watch it happen. That's the way to do it. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a place for everything else. And honestly, part of that process of drawing that traffic in is, I think we discussed, is backlinks, which are kind of that indicator of credibility to Google. And essentially all they are is a link from another website that points to yours. So a lot of times when you join these associations, they list members on their website and they link to your website. That's a backlink. That can oftentimes be a very powerful indicator to Google that your website should rank for the content you want to rank. So there's kind of that side benefit to some of those associations as well, but you have to be selective because not all of them have a good backlink. So you want to make sure you're kind of investing in the right ones. But
I think you touch on some really important things to figure out how do you maximize your time and the money for gaining attention and so like my Amazon. So Amazon takes anywhere from 14 to 17% of a commission basically on a sale. And they have a lot of rules that you have to follow. But what I've found with them is that that really helps my SEO. And even if I'm not doing any advertising on it at all, some of those links come popping up on the top of Google search.
Mm-hmm.
And the customer acquisition, the challenge is Google or Amazon owns the customer, you don't.
Right.
And I don't do fulfillment by Amazon, so I fulfill from my shop. But I have customers that have bought there and then transitioned into doing business with me. But what I've found is more and more customers that they don't want to have to set up another vendor. And so if they can buy through Amazon, and now Amazon has payment terms, they can buy my stuff through there. And the other thing I'm exploring with this is that I'm the only one there's two other aftermarket manufacturers really in the world outside of China. There might be a shop somewhere that makes a specific blade for one company. And the other two aftermarket manufacturers are larger than I am, and been around longer. But they pretty much have a static web page. They have a decent catalog on there, and they're good companies and they offer good products. So nothing but admiration for them. But they don't do anything else. So from a standpoint, they don't really have a YouTube channel. They don't utilize Facebook. They have a static Facebook page. They do not put their prices on their website or sell on their website or anywhere else.
Sure.
their model's different, and it's probably hard for them to actually do that because they have reps out in the field. And so it allows me a different kind of exposure through the internet than they can get.
Yep. We see that a lot. I mean, the search algorithms are definitely attracted to transparency, especially in pricing.
Right. So it's if anybody wants to like manufacture and distribute their own product and figure that out, I recommend them going through the steps, but there's no quick and easy way, because each of the segments are going to react differently to how you try to market to them. Like, I can't really do Google paid ads. I don't get any kind of return, or I haven't found anyone that can help me get the kind of returns.
Right.
So you have to be creative, and I guess it's a long tail approach to sales and building relationships.
You know?
Yeah.
Throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. I think it was
going deeper once you find some things that do stick.
Right. Yeah. I think it was David Ogilvy. They call him the father of modern advertising. Said 50% of my only 50% of my marketing dollars produce a result. The problem is I don't know which 50%. So just real quick, one topic that I like to kind of ask everybody about, just because I think it's the way of the future and I think we need to be thinking about it, is how are you leveraging AI, machine learning, robotics in your business, or how have you been thinking about using it?
That is a real relevant question on things that I'm thinking about. And there's a few different ways. So one is when we do like our I don't know, call it a monthly newsletter, having AI help write a sequence of emails that go out, and we put in some of the content that we want to have, and it dramatically reduces the time to actually write the scripts for that. From, if I say I want a series of 6 emails to follow up over a 2-month period of time, and these are some of the main topics I want to actually talk about. So type it in there, and within a minute and a half, it comes back with 6 emails. And if you want 3 or 4 different versions of each email, if you want to do any type of testing, A/B testing, it will do that instantly. Now, it's still at a point where you got to go back and review to make sure, does it make sense? Is it the voice of what I want my company to be? But all of a sudden, instead of outsourcing all that stuff, you can have real creative stuff created.
Right.
And now you just have to be patient and test, and then you have to learn the testing aspect of it. So from a marketing component, that is what we're doing right now. When I say it's me and another person that we have other things going on. So it dramatically lowers the time that we have to spend towards it, but we got to be committed to it, because if you just haphazardly do it, you and don't follow it through, you're not going to learn. Right. And then the thing is, AI can learn. So if you tweak it, it will come back with better stuff. That's one aspect in the marketing kind of aspect of it. There is another aspect within the shop. So our standard operating procedures, utilizing different ways that we can use AI to create the template. We bullet point the items, and it can actually do the technical writing, and then we have to go back and review to make sure, both for procedures and things in the shop, and then also in the front, we're shipping. So I ship anywhere from like 2 items to 15 items a day. What are the standard process to do that? Going into the system to create it, all the steps on pulling it, so you have a consistent experience every time for the person doing the work, and then for the customer when they receive it.
Right.
And there are tools out there that we could use anyway, but it just shrinks the time. Those things. One other area that I'm trying to figure out how to deploy it is I'm in the process of creating a podcast that is specifically for the niche of cable assembly, wire harnessing, electronic assembly. And how do I use that to help promote it?
Right.
You know, is it, and then maybe write press releases or, you know, I guess I'm in the infancy of learning how I can deploy AI. So those are things that I'm trying to tackle. There's probably so much more that I'm not even thinking about.
Yeah.
But I am trying to think about it, you know, and just as a squirrel side topic that I got on this is that I personally, as a hobby, I want to create stories of like sci-fi time travel stuff.
Okay.
And it will help me polish up my characters or my situations or the storyline, edit, and then eventually create video where I don't need huge numbers of people helping me do that. I might be able to do it with me.
Right.
And so I think I could go on forever. My words of advice would be on this topic is that you got to start using the tools. And you don't have to use every one, but you got to start using the tools, because what's going to happen, I think, over the next 3 to 5 years is you're going to see huge numbers of white collar work no longer needed in our traditional jobs. And there'll be other jobs that are created, I think, but that will be an efficiency gain for a lot of companies. There's downside to it too, but there's efficiency gain where you can increase your margins.
Yep.
So
yeah, and I think, like you said, using the tools, getting familiar with them, because those future jobs are going to be for people that know how to use AI to do better at their job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks a lot for coming on today. Awesome business there. I think a guy like you is going to find new ways every day to become more successful, and love to see what you're going to accomplish over the next 3 to 5 years here.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be on.